record. So just everyone should know that we're recording the session and it will be publicly available on YouTube in the future. The place where the Clay Studio stands and where I sit today is part of the traditional land of the Lenni Lenape. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continued relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend, that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. Thank you all for being here. Debbie Miller is the Museum Curator at Independence National Historic Park in Philadelphia. She also serves as a consulting archaeologist at Stenton, which is also in Philly, and if you haven't been there, I highly suggest it. She was previously an archaeologist and senior materials specialist for AECOM in Burlington, New Jersey, and the National Park Service. Prior to relocating to Philadelphia, she worked as an archaeologist for the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission in Harrisburg and Flowerdew 100 Foundation in Hopewell, Virginia. Debbie is also a board member of the American Ceramic Circle. The one thing you should know about Debbie is that she loves pots, especially old broken ones from archaeological excavations. Her principal research interests are the ceramic production of early Philadelphia and ceramic importation and consumption in urban areas during the colonial and federal periods. And I really enjoy talking to her and having someone else get as hot and bothered about historical objects and people's perceptions of them as I do. Welcome, Debbie.
Hi, thank you, Jen. And I will just say too, I really like for these kind of things to be informal. So please don't hesitate to interrupt me, ask questions. It's very possible that I could be all over the place, and because I get super excited and I don't have a lot of opportunities to pull my pots out of boxes these days. So I have a bunch of old friends sitting next to me that I want to show you and talk to you about. And as Jen said, my primary interest, I've looked at a lot of ceramics in my time. The collection for the last 15 years before I transitioned to the museum curator position here at Independence, I managed what's called the National Constitution Center Archaeology Project. So for those of you who are from here who know Philadelphia well, where the National Constitution Center is now located, the National Park Service did a major excavation of that site, and we recovered over 1 million artifacts from just that one location. And it's 1,300 boxes of broken stuff. And of those, over 300,000 artifacts are ceramic objects.
Wow.
And so I deal with the masses, I deal with earthenware, stoneware, porcelain. But as I found out early on, if you have a thing for British ceramics, which is what most of what came to early Philadelphia was, there's already people who know a lot more about that than you do. So I decided to focus on our friends that were made here in Philadelphia. And I love the Philadelphia earthenware industry, especially in the 18th century, so the 1700s, because it's really the precursor for what we would consider to be the Pennsylvania German tradition that gets so much play in this area in particular, but none of that would have happened without Philly. So
yeah, tell us how you feel about that, Debbie.
Everybody needs to recognize that, it started here and people need to appreciate that. So I'll leave it there. I could fight people over these things, so it's we all do get very hot and bothered about our ceramics. But I was telling Jen yesterday that I bet that the majority of people who have come to the Clay Studio on 2nd Street don't realize that that site is actually the site of a historic pottery. There was a pottery that started there on the north side of Elfreth's Alley, probably in the 17 teens. I haven't been able to track it down, but the first 2 German potters who arrived in Philadelphia in 1726 purchased that land, and it became what's called the Hillegas pottery for the next 20, 25, 30 years, and then it actually passed on to somebody else. And what's really neat is that Elizabeth Drinker who lived on Front Street, the very well-known diarist. She actually wrote about the night that the pottery caught on fire and burned, and she watched it from her house on Front Street. So so little news for my clay buddies at the Clay Studio. You are sitting on a historic pottery site, and just so you can see, this is one of the things that was made there. And this is a local piece of Philadelphia red earthenware. One of the great things about Hillegas is that it was two brothers, and one of them lived directly across from where you guys are on 2nd Street. And in the mid 1990s, there was an archaeological excavation on Bread Street, which backs up, which is behind 2nd Street there. And that there were a couple of privies back there. And well, the Hillegases dumped all of their waste material into one of those privies. So it is the only pottery in historic Philadelphia that we can actually attribute wares to. And so that's super cool because they are also very unique. And you'll see here, one of the things that makes them unique is the way that they rolled their rims. Their bowls in particular are very, kind of straight-sided, but virtually all of their ceramics that they were making have either a double or triple profile on their rim. And that's one of the defining characteristics. I've had a chance to look at all of that waste material. It's actually up in Trenton, New Jersey, sitting in boxes. But the slip decoration, they're the ones that probably introduced the use of copper oxide to the local industry to create, the green color in the slip. Although this is, sometimes they put green in the slip, sometimes they just sprinkled the oxide over top the slip. There were different methods, but
were they immigrants from England, and did they train there?
No, they were German. The Hill brothers were German. And it's those really mushy lines of France and Germany in the 18th century. So there was a lot of movement of people. There was a stoneware potter here by the name of Anthony Duchess. Well, he was the backer. His 3 sons were the actual potters. We still don't know who trained them, but he was also technically German, but he was a French Huguenot. And so he had ended up, they had moved from Alsace, and then they were in Germany for a bit, and then they went to England. And when he immigrated here in 1699, I believe, he came directly from England. But the Hillegas are the first Germans that we can track down. And prior to that, with the exception of the Duchess, everybody was an English Quaker. The potters here were English Quakers. Yeah. Most of them were connected as well. So
that's so interesting. Well, and we can talk about that a little bit. I just wanted to pause and ask if you would tell us about how little Debbie wanted to. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
No, it's okay. That's what my family calls me.
How did you evolve into this archaeologist curator? What were those early sparks, and what was your path?
I always enjoyed history. I grew up in a very rural part of Virginia on the Tennessee border, which has a lot of culture, but it's basically devoid of historical culture. So I mean, there's just not a lot there. There's no historic sites. There's just not a lot. So I was always interested in history, and it was really early trips to see family in Maryland and stuff that really fostered that, as we were able to go to museums and historic sites. And I liked archaeology too. So I went to school to study archaeology. I found out very, very quickly that field work was not for me. Digging in Central Virginia in August, it stinks. It's awful. It's hot. There's bugs the size of dogs. You're usually next to a swamp. There's snakes. I mean, there's just all kinds of unpleasant stuff, sunburn. And I was like, no way, this is not for dead. So I immediately retreated to the lab, where I found that I was actually really interested in the objects, even more so than the physical part of archaeology. So so that kind of started it in undergrad. And then I worked at Flower Dew 100. We had a collection of about 500,000 objects that dated from, I mean, there were Clovis points from the site. So we had, 15,000 years of history. But I really, that's where I cut my teeth in the 17th and 18th century, which are what I'm predominantly interested in. And it just kind of went from there. Moving to Philadelphia, my husband and I never thought we would stay here, but we quickly fell in love with the history and culture here and the material culture. The objects that I've worked with here just, really, really blew me away. And I have had this beautiful opportunity just to immerse myself in all of these things. And that's just kind of like, just over time led to it to where I am now. And ceramics in particular, they're so important to archaeology for dating our contexts that, that's one of the things that, is driven into you very early on. And I just find them to be fascinating. They have so much to tell you. You just have to know how to tease that information out. And it's been a joy getting to learn those things. And now that I'm the curator at Independence, I have access to all of our archaeological collections, not just 1 million. I now have access to about 4 million things. The older sites here are really, the things that are like late, 1600s, early 1700s. I mean, it's just, it's an untouched resource that is just really going to change the way we think and think about and understand these things. So
yeah, so these things have all been excavated from Independence Historic Park, those several blocks within Philadelphia.
Yeah, so Independence, we're like a big L. You have Independence Hall and you have the mall, but then it actually goes all the way over to 2nd Street. So we have about 52 acres in our entire campus, and then that we have about 50 buildings. So it's a very large park. And of course, the archaeology that's done here, at least today, is really predominated by the law. It's federal land, so there are federal laws that apply to it. But there was a lot of digging here. Philadelphia is also kind of one of the birthplaces of urban archaeology. The first shovel in the ground here in 1948 at the establishment of the park.
Yep.
So we have things that have been sitting in boxes for longer than my parents have been alive, and I'm looking forward to getting in them and seeing what secrets they may hold.
Yeah, for some of those things, I suppose it's getting to the point where it could be in a box longer than it was before it was existed before it was in a box.
Yes, something.
So tell us a little bit more about exactly, what you're doing there and what's your mission as the curator of Independence.
Oh, what's my mission?
Yeah, your personal, professional
when
mission.
I take over the National Park Service.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things that I would really like to do here. Some of it's just good old fashioned, what we call collections management, getting a handle on what we have, where it's at, and how we can better store it and preserve it. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot. Even though we're a federal agency, we don't have a lot of financial resources to put towards our collections. I mean, and the fact that without the stuff, there wouldn't even be a park, right? So it's kind of hard to get people to focus on our collections sometimes. But I would really, really like to just, get in and do a lot of hands-on work with archaeological collections so I can get them organized and actually see them. But we have other wonderful things. We have about 400,000 decorative objects in our collection as well, which covers everything from fine arts to furniture to smaller decorative arts, objects that belong to the founders. I mean, it covers everything. And one of the things that's been most interesting to me, because I've been at the park for well over a decade, but I'm new to this position, so it's opened up a whole new world of things to me. But we have what's called the city collection, which is all of the objects that came into the Park Service's hands that were in Independence Hall and basically the other buildings on Independence Square when the administration of those buildings was passed from the city of Philadelphia to the National Park Service. And that stuff is just awesome. And a lot of it hasn't been well documented. Because it was just kind of there, and then things grew and changed and whatnot. So I would really like to go through and do a full assessment of those things and just kind of see what we have. As a brief example, I was going through the collections because, as you said, my husband is the director of Stinton, and so I'm still very much involved with the site there, and they're always looking for Logan family objects. So the family who built the house and lived there for several generations. Well, when I was going through the catalog here, I was able to find basically the carcass of a case clock and a pewter plate that has the Logan family cipher on it. And
Wow.
we also have a chair that has a very long and storied history of being at Stinton and then came here through the antiquarian John Fanning Watson, for those of you who know him. So like that was really exciting. And we're going to loan those objects back to Stinton so they can go home.
That's fun. That's so exciting. And I love what you were saying about the stuff that came into the collection from when the administration changed, because I don't think a lot of people think about what happened at Independence Hall between the time of the revolution and later, but the historiography of how that building was used and treated is so interesting in the 19th century, but even the 20th century. I remember talking to an artist who grew up in Philly, and as a little kid, he would just run around because the doors were open. So he just remembers like running around playing in there in like the early 50s, I guess. So I would love to see that story told through the objects. And so what's the best place for a person to go and see the collection? Like, I would assume there are like little nuggets of it on view in different spots.
Well, with COVID, there's not a lot on view,
Right.
Unfortunately. And we do, so unfortunately, a lot of our collection is not on. It's pretty typical with any institution where, I think on average of only about 6% of what you have, in your collection is on view at any time. Aside from the hall and the bell, our second bank portrait gallery, we have one of the largest collections of original portraits by Charles Wilson Peale that actually hung in his museum, which was on the second floor of Independence Hall. They've been beautifully arranged as part of the exhibit by our chief curator, Carrie Dethorne. And it's really, really a spectacular exhibit, and I highly recommend that everybody come in there. So, because it does tell the story of the founding of the nation, but also the story of all of the ideas that went into that through portraiture, and it's just fantastic. We also have the Benjamin Franklin Museum, and my favorite thing here at the park is actually what's called Fragments of Franklin, which is over on Market Street. It's one of the Market Street houses, and the interior of the buildings, because of course we inherit a lot of old buildings and we have studied those architecturally through over the past 60 plus years, I should say. So it's actually an open, so you can see all of the changes that occurred to the building over time, through the skeletal features, if you will, of what was left behind. And then we have an archaeology exhibit in the basement. So that's my favorite thing.
And that's behind the post office.
It's on the other side of the carriageway from the
okay.
So the post office is here. There's the carriageway, and then it's right here.
Got it. Okay, well, that's good to know. We have a couple of questions, and then after that, let's look at some more of the things you pulled. Are there plans to digitize the collection? I bet you would love that to happen, but it would be expensive.
It would be wonderful. There is a museum catalog that's available through the National Park Service. I can send you the link later. We do have a lot of our portraits digitized, and it's something we work towards. But we also have a very small staff. I see Carrie came on, and
hi, Carrie.
Hey, Karen. So we do hope to digitize more in the future, but comprehensively, that's a long project that's going to take longer than any of us are going to be alive. Unfortunately, start to really look at the size of the collections.
4 million, yeah. Yes. Okay, but good questions. All right. Do you want to show us one of your things you pulled out, or should I? And then I'll show you one of these, and we'll do name that shard.
Sure. Let's see. What did I pull out? So I've been talking to Daniel a little bit, and Mark Shapiro knows me well too. So one of the things, as I alluded to earlier, is my feelings about the idea of Pennsylvania Germans and Pennsylvania Dutch and how those are misnomers and we need to stop it. But that's another story. But I pulled one of my favorite things.
I love that I can see Daniel's face. I know how excited
Which
he
is
is.
this guy here.
Wow.
And this is one of my favorite pieces of redware, and a lot of fights over this in particular because this was historically cataloged as Moravian. And still want to fight people who.
And how do you feel about that, Debbie?
And these are all good-natured fights between various colleagues, but this was actually made here in Philadelphia, and one of the reasons that it was given the attribution of Moravian is because a long time ago somehow it got into the nomenclature of local ceramics that anything that had a colorful slip had to have been made by the Moravians because that was their only frame of reference. Unfortunately, they were also looking at North Carolina Moravian pottery, which, yes, there are a lot of similarities that exist here between the two Moravian communities, but it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Philadelphia came before that pottery was even established in Bethlehem and then later in Bethabara in North Carolina. And also the first Moravian potter in Bethlehem was a Philadelphia trained potter named David Miller, who converted to Moravianism and became Daniel Mueller. So that's why I always like to show this guy. This dates to about 1730. And it's just remarkable, and you're not going to be able to see it, I don't think, but this is actually like a grayish blue slip here, which we have been able, and it also overfired, so it's really bubbled and not in the best shape it's fall off. But you can see that a lot going on. You have the bluish color, and then this natural little clay slip, you have the white slip, the green, the black. It really just covers all of the bases. And of course, this is a pan. So this would have been used for food preparation, storage. But then the other part I love about it is, and this is the fun thing about archaeological things especially, is they're always covered with humanity. So you have, the fingerprints from slippy fingers that held on to them. And then you can see this one was not used very much. We can see the use wear on the bottom of them. And this one was not used very much. So it was probably more of a display piece. But I think I have one because sometimes they're just like covered in char, black, from where they were exposed to heat for forever. But this was made about 1730.
Debbie, could I see the cross section of the lip on that one? Okay, great, thank you.
And Rick had a question too. He asked, are those tulips? And I'm gonna say yes, but I'll leave it to Debbie. And is there a connection to Turkish pottery? Daniel really wants to see the profile. Can you turn it a little bit more?
Yeah, hold on, sorry.
Oh, you're good?
That's my screen for a minute.
I
don't know how you want to see the profile.
Keep turning it a little bit more. Nope, the other way. Yeah, oh, that's good, okay.
So about the tulips. So tulips are one of those things that everybody like, oh, tulips are German. No, tulips are worldwide. And I have actually spent a lot of time tracing the origins of tulips on ceramics. And I don't think that there was a question about, is there a connection to a Turkish pottery? I've never seen any, even any Turkish immigrants show up in historic records for the 17th and 18th century here in Philadelphia. But in tracing these back, tulips were readily used also in English pottery, especially Staffordshire slipware, which I don't have any of here with me, but yes, they are tulips, and we see them regularly on ceramics, but it is not an indication of who made that vessel, because it's a standard design element that was found across the old world.
Yeah, yeah, and the whole idea of, what's fascinating to me about blue and white, or slipware, that this idea that they're copying or trying to emulate porcelain, and then it comes from East Asia down through North Africa, up through Spain to the Netherlands. So it doesn't mean that maybe that decoration was like picked up somewhere along the way and kind of continued, but no like direct contact. So that's, to me, part of what's so exciting about ceramics. Like you said, it's sort of it forms the basis of so much of our archaeological material. It's also, and in that way also reflects that as soon as the trade routes opened, there's just so much transfer of culture happening everywhere. It's exciting. So I think
Which is why I like to be careful about attributions, because ideas, people, tools, all of these things travel,
right.
And they travel over time and they travel over space, and it's very important to recognize the movement of not just goods but also ideas.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of something we think about in furniture sometimes, which is in Philadelphia particularly, like there's a form that's made in Philadelphia, it's an urban form, people think of it, it's like high style, and then it's made out in Lancaster when somebody goes out and makes it there, and they kind of have this idea that it's countrified or it's less fancy or nice. It's just different now, and that's so interesting that the culture has changed. And the same thing happened with ceramics. Like you made it one way and then it evolved as it moved, and that's where the information is in the changes.
Yes.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's exciting.
And the other thing is too, is there's this idea of primitiveness that comes along, especially with like redwares. It's like, oh, it's it's Germanic, so therefore it's primitive, whatever.
Right.
This is an incredibly sophisticated piece of.
Yeah.
This is a skilled craftsman. This is not like somebody decided to be a potter one day and just was like, oh, I'm going to pull from all of these ideas, and make this thing. Like these things, the craft here was incredibly sophisticated. And as time went on, it developed into its own style that existed here in Philadelphia that ended up being copied all along the East Coast. So yeah, it's I always get a little bit offended when people are like, oh, well, that was,
Yeah.
people in Philadelphia. It's like,
Yeah. So I'll show one now since we're going back and forth. How about that one?
Yes. Here, let me grab something. So that is a piece of locally made slipware. That's probably late 18th, early 19th century. Hold the bottom of it, Jen. Get that coggled rim up at the top.
Oh yeah.
That's so that coggled rim that you see there is very, very standard on local pieces. I have another one here where you can see the coggling.
Oh, Daniel wants to say something.
Oh wait, hold on, Daniel.
Oh no, you're just waving your arms, and I think you want to talk. Sorry, he's just excited.
So the shard that you just held would have looked similar to this, and this is what called yours is actually like a square or a rectangular bread loaf, like a dough dish, if you will. But this is what has become known as the Philadelphia style. And it is a combination of the coggle and then the trailed slip and the addition of the copper oxide. And this is what it really became prevalent here in the mid 18th century. And then it's being exported all up and down the East Coast and even to the West Indies. And then by the time you get to the 1760s, 70s, it's starting to be copied like in Baltimore, Alexandria, New York. And that coggled rim, just too, so you know, so it kind of serves, it serves a dual function. A, it's a nice little grip, you know, it's something you can, you know, grab onto, but also these were fired, stacked like this. And so that coggled rim prevents the glaze from sticking the pot that this is leaned up to. So it would, you know, you would kind of have them like this as they're stacked in the kiln. And you can tell that because you can see how the copper oxide ran down, because this was just applied with a brush. They would have just gone and boop, 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 boop. And then it runs, you know, as it's being fired. Mm. A lot of times too, you can see, I don't see it on this one. You can see the halo that was left.
Yeah.
The pot behind it was stacked, and that evidence of char, this is a prime example. You can see how well used this thing was, and this one's cool. I don't know if you can see it, but it has
Is it a figure?
It has a bird.
Oh, a bird. Yeah.
And then there's a flower here that it may be a pomegranate. It's really pretty. But this is an early example of the local slipware too. But
that's so great.
But yeah, but you can see that it was used extensively.
I love it when it's all broken, but one of the parts that's still together is like an old repair with staples or something, like something that's still, it's like, look how many times this has been repaired.
Well, and funny enough, hold that thought. So we also see repairs historically too. So this is a Chinese export porcelain punch bowl, probably the 1760s. But at some point it broke in half, and you can see the line running down. But see those little holes right at those?
Yeah.
And then down here, and you can see them even better on the back there. Those are old rivet marks, and they riveted them. And then wired it together in the 18th century to repair it. It got broken again, and they gave up at that point. So,
which means that it was valued. They didn't just throw, because when other things broke, they went in the privy, and that was fixed. So
yeah, and I've seen repairs, like historic Deerfield, for instance, has a tin glazed earthenware dish that broke, and somebody repaired it with twine. Historically, so they drilled through it and then repaired it with twine. Super cool stuff. I love to see repairs, because it tells you the importance of objects to people across time.
Yeah, there's so much information, history of use.
Yes.
And ceramics are both about the people who made them and the people who used them and the culture that, you know, they were living in. It's just super awesome. Okay, so here's another one.
Yep. So that is what this turned into around the 1820s. So that's a later. See, if you can put that back up, we call that little flourish thing, those are crow's feet, for lack of a better. It's a collector's term that was used to describe those. And those designs predominate in the 19th century. So the local redware industry really starts to peter out in the 1830s, 1840s, as you get to the rise of stoneware, especially if you're familiar with the Remy stoneware. That was both here and then in Baltimore and in New York and Alexandria. It was a big family, and they like to travel. Oh yeah, I know somebody just said check out Andrew Baseman for repairs. Yeah, Andrew's a friend of mine, and I collect make do's which is what repaired ceramics are called, but I collect make do's on a very like teensy baby scale. And I love them, and I love to see them. We see make do's, especially like we'll get a teapot and the handle had broken off. And we'll only have a little bit of the metal that survives, attached to it, that it had been repaired with a metal handle. So yeah.
And there's sometimes just the handle left.
And there's just the handle. Yeah. That's a big old honking piece of something from the 1830s or 40s.
Yeah. Did we say this was a chamber pot?
No, that's like a ewer or a pitcher.
Okay. This is a later one too, but I like the. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's probably like a vegetable dish or something. That's actually transfer printed. It's a white ironstone, and I think that's a derivative of what's called the seaweed pattern. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good point. There's another artist, Bouke de Vries. He's Dutch. I think he lives in England. He was, and I guess still is, a ceramics restorer, but he started making his own sculptures, and they're often like vessel forms with shards. Anyway, check him out. It's cool. This I think is the one we decided was the sort of oldest.
Oh, yeah. So that's a piece of what's called pearlware. That's the central element of the bottom of like a reticulated basket. That dates to probably about the 1780s, 1790s. I wish I had something that was a better example of that, but that's a very refined vessel. That was probably, if it came from the same hole as the other stuff, that was something that somebody had held on to, because it predates the material that you have by about 30 years, if not longer.
This one feels to me like related. Well, it's the speckle.
That's a lid, right?
Yeah, I think
that's Rockingham Bennington. It's a yellowware. That's actually a chamber pot lid. So it's you see enough of this stuff, you can look at a piece of it and you're like, oh, I know what that is.
Well, the fact that like you looked at this, I meant to say out loud, like you looked at this one relatively flat piece and you knew it was from a bread bowl, bread bowl.
This stuff. Yeah, it's like a we would call them like a dough bowl. Again, things are used for everything.
Yeah, like this one to me, you can even a regular person can kind of see that it's from some sort of vessel, but this one just, that's your expertise there. You're like, exactly.
Yeah, well, and that one in your hand is also like a vegetable dish. It's shellage pearlware. That's a little bit later. The edge that you see on that is something that evolved over time. It starts as a feather and moves to a shell to correspond with the Rococo movement. Mm. You'll see on that one, there's a little teeny bud, as we call it, on there.
On the corner.
Yeah, on that corner right there. And that's indicative of a piece that was made probably sometime about 1800 to 1820.
Yeah, I should probably have fixed my nails before I did this. Don't look at my nail polish. Do you want to show us one of yours before I show you? You have more exciting ones. Ours are fun because they're from our new building, but yours are nicer.
Here, I'll show you a piece of stoneware because I really, really like stoneware. And chamber pots. So our stuff is excavated predominantly from privies, and then we find a lot of chamber pots. So there's like human waste humor that goes into archaeology in urban settings, and we kind of get past the giggle factor on it. But this chamber pot, this is from the Duchess pottery, and of course I didn't get the piece that actually has an AD underneath the handle. But this is the French Huguenot family who was potting probably by about 1720 here, right on the block on Chestnut Street between 4th and 5th. And one of the cool things too about the Duchess pottery, as I was telling some colleagues earlier, is that we dug a lot of the waste material on Independence Square, because in the 18th century, they used the detritus, all of the waste, the broken saggers, anything, all the failures, all of that stuff went in as fill in Independence Square. Mm. So we have like really awesome things like this. So this is the bottom of the sagger. Oh. And this is a tankard that got stuck to it, and they threw it away. So it's awesome to see the manufacturing technology as well. And Duchess, they're a fascinating story because they it's very long, and they experimented and everything. One of the Duchess boys was sent to Boston to try, well, actually Charlestown, to try to teach them how to make stoneware. And then more importantly, another one of the sons, Andrew, went to South Carolina where he discovered Cherokee kaolin clay, started experimenting with early porcelain. And do have, there were a couple of years ago, there was a big story from the Museum of the American Revolution because they found a piece of true American porcelain there. I've been able to identify about 12 additional pieces in our collections here that, let me just say, we're already here.
I was gonna say, just here, that was a throwdown. I believe that was a throwdown there.
Me and those guys throw down all the time, so you should hear us fight about Moravians. So, but the Duchess stuff is really cool, and there's not a lot of it. There is not a surviving piece of Duchess stoneware that's known, like, out in the world. It's all archaeological material. It's really interesting because they are using different tools and different methods for their work. And you can see they had this, the flower here was clearly a stamp. That, you know, it was a stamp that had been created using probably tin or something along those lines. And then we think that some of these were probably stamps as well, because we see some of these designs cross some of the pots, if you will. We have another chamber pot that actually has fleur-de-lis on it, which is to the, you know, French heritage of the family. But I really, really like these guys, and I wish there were more. There's some out of the state. They were doing like a it's all gray stoneware, but some of it does tend to follow, if you're familiar with like stoneware from England from the 1720s, that is a natural colored stoneware with like an iron oxide wash over it, so it's more brown than anything. A lot of their stuff looks like that too. But yeah, chamber pots were a big business for the Duchess, if our archaeological collections are any indication.
And another archaeological conversation could be about the loss that was the architectural loss that happened really when the National Park Service came in and decided to take down all the.
It wasn't just us. Blame the city.
Well, it wasn't you. It was people a long time ago. I'm not blaming you. But as a Victorian at heart, it's painful for me sometimes, especially the Frank Furnace buildings. But then you got to be able to dig there, and there's so much great stuff. So from that loss came something to find.
Yeah, and you know, I get yelled at by a lot of people about, you know, just the destruction of old city Philadelphia, you know, through what happened with the establishment of the park. And everybody needs to remember that this was a very different place in the 1950s too, and it really was one of the first urban renewal efforts. And regardless of how we feel about it now, at the time it was incredibly innovative and progressive. And while we certainly wouldn't literally clear the air as has been done, you know, as was done then, you know, I'll be honest with you, it's still happening in Philadelphia.
Oh, absolutely.
It's happening every day, and it's happening in every community, and we're losing resources at an astounding rate. And just so you know too about archaeology, there are no archaeological regulations for the city of Philadelphia. There is no requirement at all to do archaeology for any construction project. The only reason we do them here in National Park is because we're federal land and there's federal laws. Everything else is hard.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah, and those of us at the Clay Studio walked by that site on 2nd Street a couple of years ago where they found the cemetery that hadn't actually been moved when it was supposed to have been moved. So that was.
And the city knew that cemetery was there. They had been informed.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. And then so 95 and the construction of 95 is what, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may be, is what helped us find some of the Bonin and Morris early porcelain works. I think that was under a lot of that materials at the art museum in boxes and storage.
So those are two different things.
Okay.
There's no archaeology done when I-95 was cut through the city. None.
I thought there was like, okay, you have 2 weeks, you can dig right here. No, it didn't happen at all.
It was only for diggers. So of course there are people who dig privies and whatnot for hobby.
Fun. Yeah, which is fine.
And it's fine as long as you're not breaking any laws.
Well,
and
yes, of course.
A lot of them are trespassing and they shouldn't be. And a lot of times they do damage resources in doing it. So, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but there were a lot of old diggers that dug along 95 that I've gotten to know. And I've seen things, that were found there, but the Bonham Morris Works was part of a very quick and dirty like salvage dig in 1976, I think, where they basically just like begged the owner of a property that was about this big that had a truck sitting on it, and they were like, please let us get in there, and that's all that was dug. And yeah, that material is at the PMA. There hasn't been any other excavations done there at the actual site of Bonham and Morris,
which was like South Street down there, Southwark.
Yeah, it's farther down. It's actually just south of Washington Avenue.
Oh, okay.
There's a weird little, it's you can find it on the map because it's a weird little triangle that has a little street that shoots off of Washington Ave, and that's how it was historically set up. And it's all still down there. I mean, I can't say that I haven't gone on Google Earth and looked in people's backyards to see what kind of ground surfaces may survive all across the city where potteries were once located, and even the clay pits too. There were clay pits here right in the city. There's a map from 1796 that shows 13 clay pits, within the actual boundaries of Philadelphia, which the largest one was located up at 9th and Race. And there was a brick clamp that was there too. They were making bricks, but that, from my understanding, by the time they closed up that hole, it was about 50 feet deep. They had been in clay from there for almost 100-year period. And
there were all those clay pits, and then would there be a brick factory right next to that, or were there more? I mean, there were so many bricks needed for the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah, the clamps. The brick clamps are the way that they make the bricks, and then they put them in what's called a big clamp, and they fire them. But there was usually a brickworks adjacent to the pits. And then as time went on and regulation grew, they started to control who had access to those things.
And did they move up north, like where the brick manufacturing?
By the time you get to the 19th century, actually a lot of the potters who produced traditional, red earthenware, things like this, actually moved into producing especially fire brick and like chemical wares, things that,
manufacturing,
growing and especially in the years prior to the Civil War. Yeah, and everything starts to push up towards the Northern Liberties, and products for domestic consumption, kind of phase out, and you get more of a industrial production from the potteries.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know we don't have too much more time left, so I'll just show a couple more things that I think are maybe less exciting to you, but we'll just show them anyway.
Oh yeah, that's the bottom of a little teacup. A little tea bowl in the vintage pattern by J&G Alcock out of Cobridge.
How did you know that?
Because it's written on the bottom.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you'd be stunned. We impress a lot of people just by reading things.
Which is a good historian's trick.
Exactly. And that is a piece of what we would call annular ware. So that's a white body that's identical in composition to the piece that you just showed. But those were those colors obviously produced by the application of slip.
Yeah, and then this is similar.
While they were turning on a lathe. Yeah.
And then we have some ubiquitous willowware.
Yes, and that is the actual willow pattern. You can always tell it by those two cute little sparrows that are up there at the top.
We actually got a piece with a sparrow, and it has a tiny bit of a mark on the bottom.
Yep. Yeah, it was produced by like everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's, oh, this is the same. Is that the same as that blue and white stuff?
Yeah, so that is also annular wear, but the decoration that you see on the front, the blue on the white field, that was actually applied by a sponge. So the decoration's been sponged on there. And again, that's a little bit later. So that's like 1840s, 50s.
I think this maybe is more willow wear.
It's a transfer. It's
Something transfer.
things. Yeah.
Nice chunky piece of.
Oh yeah, that's a nice big chunky a red wear. Is there anything on the other side like a
Yeah, there's like a little smushy blue kind of situation.
Yeah, so that dot, we call it daubed manganese. So it's a manganese powder that's like daubed onto the vessel. Really predominated after about 1820 for standard, you know, like standard redware. So it would look, here we go. So like here's a piece where you have more of it on there.
And this is
been nicely rouletted around the top as well.
Yeah. This is later too. This is like a almost like a.
Oh yeah, you should just get rid of that.
I think it's.
That's
I told you
actually
I like
part of it.
Victorian things.
That,
I know all
that
these.
either, and that's probably a spittoon.
Great. I love how much.
That's it. I'm
There's
telling
probably
you.
no more DNA left on these things that are all over my.
You might be surprised.
Definitely no coronavirus, which is good. Okay, do you want to show us something else? Oh crap, I got it all over my computer.
I got a question. The redware was used on the stove. They could have been used on the stove, you know, if we're talking about, you know, 1830s, very early stoves that have a, you know, a cast iron top. But the vast majority of redware would have, you know, when we get back to, you know, this idea of charring and stuff, this would have sat on a trivet over top of coals, and would have been used that way. You do have to be careful about these on direct heat because they will crack and they'll break. But it's really, you know, once you get to stoves is really when you're getting into stoneware, which can conduct heat at a much better level than earthenware can.
There's a question about the glazed pattern on bricks.
I would is the glazed bricks on fire at gas places in Philadelphia neighborhoods from the Philadelphia potters? I think it's safe to assume, at least once you're past the very earliest period of Philadelphia history when they would have been importing bricks, that the vast majority of bricks would have been made here. Yes. And those glazed headers, you know, they would have been glazed on site as well.
And the glazed headers, I've had a lot of people ask that question. It's a decorative element, right? It doesn't have any purpose besides, not that decoration is not a purpose. But.
Yeah, but they're decorative.
Yeah. Cool. Well, does anyone have any other questions? Does anyone want to unmute themselves to chat a little bit?
And here I can do this too. These are the pots that I've
sorry. Yes, absolutely.
Is there anything that anybody sees that they would like to ask a question about?
How about that bowl? I know they're all bowls. The most deep of the bowls.
This guy?
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked. So this is what we call a pedalware bowl. Daniel says everything.
Yeah.
Pedalware bowl. So these like originated in Philadelphia. Has what's called the Philadelphia foot. It also has what we call the Philadelphia well, which is a little well that's there in the middle where there's always glaze pulled because they were fired like this and everything ran down. But you can see this one isn't so nicely pedaled, but usually they have these really nice lobes where they pour the slip in and then they, you know, spread it around. And then you can always see the space where they poured it out too. But on these, they typically add the manganese, the manganese and the copper oxide for decoration. But this is what we call the classic Philadelphia petalware bowl. And they're synonymous with early Philadelphia redware.
So beautiful. Great.
They're beautiful, yeah.
All right, I'll let somebody else pick.
How they change over time, as the form evolves.
Take yourself off mute, whoever you want, and well, let's show us the picture of all of them again, and someone can yell out, and then.
Okay.
I understand some of you might have to leave, so thank you for coming if you have to go, but we're going to spend 5 more minutes looking at pots.
I'm going to talk about this one.
Okay.
And this is much later. So this is between 1860 and 1822, and it was made at a factory that was out on Market Street by the pottery was run by a man named David Duchess, who was a tinkerer in various things, but he tinkered in pottery. He bought an older pottery called the Washington pottery that had been there lock, stock, and barrel in 1816. And what is so remarkable about this is that and engine turning is where you literally stick something on an engine lathe, and there is a piece of the lathe that is called a cam that has the design that you want on it, cut into it. And basically that cam controls the mechanism that is going to cut the vessel. And a lot of times what you see is more along the lines of this, where you have a repeated pattern, that is, repeated over the course of this, but this is also cut into it, but it's operated by steam. And this one is just remarkable because it has this beautiful S curve, that's made by, the cutting itself. But technologically, this is a remarkable piece of pottery for early Philadelphia, and it really shows the level of sophistication in the works here. And when this was made, and the Washington pottery before it, they were really trying to take advantage of a void in the local market that was created by the War of 1812, when basically all imports were cut off. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, because once that war was over, ships started pouring back in with all of their baubles from Britain. And our local industry, with the exception of the redware and then later the stoneware, the emergence of the refined industry, kind of faded. But even though this is a beautiful piece, it does have some one-off characteristics that you would not see from things abroad. So if you look at it straight on, what's weird about that handle terminal?
Not symmetrical.
It's not cut straight, so there's little things like that. And then there are always little pieces right here, there's some kiln junk sunk to it, and the feet aren't always refined. There you can see the bottom of it, Daniel. As I see you leaning in. But this was actually probably gilded as well. But I love these later things, and I just wrote an article about Duchess and his pottery, because I'm still very excited about it, because they were also making things like this.
Oh, that's pretty.
What we call Philadelphia Queensware, but this is actually a purple enamel that was applied after. We think this was probably 3 firings. So you have, you do the initial bisque, and then there's the glaze, and then it was enameled and probably went through an annealing process, to get that enamel to stick. And it's this weird aubergine color that's just really pretty. This is the only piece of enameled Philadelphia, what we call Queensware, that I've ever seen.
So it's Seixas, S-A-T-I-U-S?
S-E-I-X-A-S.
S-E-I-X.
So can you get through to that other side?
I'd have to climb back there.
Jen Martin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mute.
Can't see it.
Hold on a second.
I'm pretty sure that the
Where is she? I can mute her. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Is S-E-I-X what? I-U-S?
S-E
Sorry.
IXAS.
Yes. And where's the article that we can read?
It's now available online through Ceramics in America, which
Okay.
is the Chipstone sponsored journal. And I can send you a link to it as well.
Okay.
If you want to
All
share
right.
it.
Anybody?
Great stuff.
Great scaffold. Who wants to take it? Oh, there's Melissa. Hi. I thought you were teaching. You came on the end. And Matt, hi. So
Hi.
anybody want to say hi or bye? And we have like, maybe we'll take 3 more minutes of Debbie's time. If she wants to show us one more thing.
Hi.
Come on, Matt, Melissa, you guys come up with something.
Oh, I wanted to ask a question, if I may.
Sure.
This is really fascinating. I love this subject in archaeology and Philadelphia pottery, and I think it's absolutely intriguing. Are you going to be doing any more or any archaeological digs? Are there any sites planned in any other parts of the city? Do you know?
So we don't have any involvement with archaeology outside of our national park here. And as of right now, we do not have any digs on the horizon. I don't know, as far as other things going on in the city, I don't know of anything new that's coming up. I mean, COVID has really like shut down a lot of stuff. There is an on excavation along I-95. If you've driven up 95, you've been through all the construction and they're doing a lot of interchange work and stuff like that. And because it's a federal highway, it requires archaeology. So there's been a very extensive 10-year project that has basically started all the way up at Fort Washington and went all the way down to 2nd and Callawhill. And that was work that was being done by my former company, AECOM. So they've kind of hit 95, and the hopes are is that they'll pick up again in South Philly and Southwark, for the project as it continues down there. So that's kind of the biggest thing going on right now. And there's a website for that called Digging I-95. It's pretty like heavy like archaeology speak, because we have a really hard time of getting out of our archaeology speak sometimes. So it can be a little painful to read, but there are cool artifact pictures. So, and the material, I will say this too, when I was working on that site, some of the sites that were up there, because they hit a lot of material, especially in Fishtown and Kensington, it is different than what we see here in Old City. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. I mean, one, it's all a little bit later, but it's also, those communities up there were kind of, they were in a lot of ways independent, communities from what was happening here in Old City, and you had different, what's the word I'm looking for? Different storekeepers, different, ships that they were pulling their material from. So it is all a little bit different.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the book that was written with the archaeology from the what was it called, where the Constitution Center is now? There's a really nice book written about that.
Did you write that book, Debbie?
I did not write that book. No, that's the project that I've managed for a very long time on the NCC. And we actually are not finished with that project. We've gotten through about 600,000 of the 1 million artifacts from that site. So hopefully soon we'll be able to, complete processing and analyzing that material and get a full report out. So the information that you've read, which is I'm going to assume that you're talking about Digging in the City of Brotherly Love, which is by Becky.
Yes, Sarah's book.
I'm sorry.
The writer Sarah something. I don't know. I forget.
Well, anything that you read about the NCC site is all preliminary as of right now. So
cool.
we hope to get some popular material about it soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. I think Melissa and Matt might want to show us something.
Yeah, she's holding something.
No,
I'm really proud of this. So a couple of years ago, I went to Dish Camp and I saw a presentation on Dutch cook pots, which was my first time learning about them. And then a few months later, I dug a Dutch cook pot out of our privy, and I recognized it immediately because of that presentation, and the handle especially made it really easily identifiable. So I got very excited that I was like, I have one now. And then we have this this marbled, oh look.
Sorry. Debbie, it's taken a lot of discipline to just be like,
I really hate
Debbie's,
you guys sometimes.
COVID, the timing with COVID is so terrible. We want you to come and hang out. But yeah, we got very lucky. And for context, for people who don't, we're at Front and Callow Hill. So this is stuff that we found when we added a third story to a building that turned out to be really old.
And see, going back to what I said first.
Yeah.
So about Hillegas and these, one of it again, those trailed finger things, those have shown up over a lot of different sites here in Philadelphia. They found some Museum of the American Revolution. We have some here. We have a couple of pieces up at Stenton in Germantown. And there's a whole bunch that's out at the state with the old Philadelphia collections. But we do believe that because of this rim profile, those were probably, stop it. Stop it.
We have a couple.
But we think that those were made by, well, I think that they were made by the Hillegas factory. But what's really interesting in trying to trace the origins of those, it really comes out of the south of France. Whereas historically people would have said, oh, that's a German pot. But we've been able to trace them through some French archaeologists that we met on Facebook. And of course we don't share a language. So it's a little bit, it's basically just pictures with stick drawings next to it, trying to communicate with each other. But it really looks like those are from southern France. So we have a whole world, for lack of a better term, of research that we need to do to really explore the origins of these things. So
exciting.
You guys,
well, it sounds like this is definitely going to be the first of many more conversations. Maybe we can convince Debbie to teach an online class for us or something.
Hey, I love this stuff. So
I want to take that class.
And and if anybody wants, if you are working in historic, or if you're interested as a potter in historic mediums, it is worth it to explore these things firsthand. And I am always happy to introduce people to these things. And we're public servants. We believe in getting this information out to the public. And it shouldn't sit here in a vacuum. So anytime anybody, once things clear up a little bit with the Rona, I'd be more than happy to invite people into the lab to see things. So.
And do you ever train volunteers?
So we had a very, very robust volunteer program for many years. Unfortunately, because of our staffing issues now and our spatial issues, because we're moving, and everybody thinks archaeology is cool until you have to manage it, and then it's like, oh my gosh, when are you people going to be done? So as of right now, we're not taking any new volunteers on our projects. So. Unfortunately.
Maybe in a few years.
Yeah.
Hey, Katie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, could I ask a quick question? I teach high school ceramics, and I know this year's bonkers, but in the future, is this the kind of thing we could do could it be a field trip I guess I'm wondering about the size of your space.
Things are always kind of changing. I mean, we can't really accommodate more than 10 people in our space. This is the lab.
Okay.
That's the extent of it for right now. And our collections aren't stored here. They're stored in other places in the park. So, there's a lot of effort that goes into getting material and bringing it here and, having good representations of stuff. But in the future, we could certainly talk about the possibility of a field trip. So,
okay. All right.
I feel like we also now realize the value of even just doing it virtually. Even in the future, there's value in having Debbie hold these things up. And Katie knows people who dig their own clay, I'll just say. And her husband, looked on Google Earth like you did and found a white circle around a lake and went down to what is Kaolin, Pennsylvania, and dug himself some. There it is. There's
Yeah.
some Nate Williver work.
Listen, we go dig clay. So one of the things that I have really been interested in is especially looking at like 19th century things that look like this. Like, so these, this is a coffee pot that has lost some of its top, but these look very much like English ceramics of the same period. Actually, the English stuff predates it, but we've been trying to prove, is this indeed made in Philadelphia? Because we will also want to like know for sure that there was an engine turning lathe here in Philadelphia, because that's an incredible piece of industrial equipment that somebody, excuse me, would have had to have built. And so there's a lot of interest there. But I got a grant through the American Ceramic Circle several years ago that where we were trying to prove that these things were made in Philadelphia. And we basically tested clay using Icp Ms, which is like laser ablation. You know, basically you shoot lasers at clay and then it tells you, well, you grind it. It's actually a destructive sample, but it tells you what the elemental makeup of the ceramic is. And we tested the, examples like this against some of the very early 18th century material that we had that we knew was from here. And it was all inconclusive, unfortunately. But we don't have any of the clay sources. All clay sources are gone.
Yeah.
From here in the city. So like digging your own clay, like having raw clay come up somewhere, if we can find it, we get it and we keep samples of it. So
we have some from near our new site if you want some of them.
I'll take your clay.
Yeah, Nate processed it for us, but he might still, I'll have to see if we still have some of the raw stuff. Well, you have given us so much of your time generously. I think this might be our longest running lunch and learn, because everybody's so excited. Thank you for your time and your expertise and your willingness and your good nature. So I really enjoyed today. I think everyone did.
Thank you. And if anybody has questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking about this stuff, whether it be, at midnight or 7 o'clock in the morning. Just ask my husband, he gets tired of it. I have a big presence on Facebook. And I will say, for those of you who are interested in historic ceramics, there's a lot of wonderful groups on social media that are just chock full of information and photographs and this and that and this and all these good-natured fights about where was this pot made and various other things that get really interesting, and people are very passionate about it. So it's a lot of fun just to do it. So, and thank you all for tuning in and looking at all of my broken lovelies that I love so much. So
wonderful. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.